the sermon or the message for today. And so we are continuing on in our Not Home Yet series. As you can see, we've got our great logo here, Not Home Yet. What does that mean? The main idea behind this series is that we are not home yet. This place that we are at right now here on this earth, it's not our final destination. It's not our final home. Our true home is with God, and we will be close and with Him one day. But here's the thing. We also have to live here right now because that's where we find ourselves. And so, we've been going through a lot of different things. We've been going through the book of Daniel, and recently we've been going through the book of Peter. And over this week and next week, we're going to be wrapping up the book of 1 Peter. But we've been learning a lot about how to live in this life, how to live in the world that we're in. We've been learning who we are, who God has called us to be. And then also, just how to endure a lot of hard things. We talked about last week and several times how to endure the really difficult things that are in this life. And also, we've been learning how to treat other people and how to, deal with authority and how to interact with the people around us. And so, not home yet. It's both a wake-up call to our true home being with God, but also a call to live for Him while we're here on this earth. So one picture I want to start out with, actually two pictures, but the first picture is one that Pastor Isaac reminded us of several weeks ago, and it was this picture of, God's people as being the ark. And if you don't know, the ark, was in Noah's time. God had him build a big ark that housed all of the animals and Noah and his family, and the whole earth was flooded. And they were, in this ark, this safe place that God was protecting, and the whole earth, everything else was being washed away, and it was being, just covered in rain and water and storm. And you can just imagine this boat out there in this catastrophic storm that takes out, the whole world, and they're just holding on in this boat. And one day, there's the promise that they will reach dry ground. And so they need to trust God. They need to follow His direction. And so Noah does in that day, and he stays in this ark, and then eventually they do hit dry land. So it's kind of like what it's like for us as God's people, as His family. We're as the church, we're together. We're in this together. And even though the world is, often chaos, and there's all these things that are uncertain, and the Bible talks about how all of this stuff is actually going to be shaken, and it's going to fade away one day. But because of Jesus and because of what He's done in our lives, we can trust that He's going to hold us together as this ark in that flood. And today the example that Peter uses is a flock. And so you can imagine, I think we have a picture of a flock here for you. But you can imagine a bunch of sheep. And so that's the kind of flock he's talking about here. And that's how he describes the church and God's family here. So the flock is, a bunch of sheep. You can imagine them out in the wilderness. Maybe they're in some pastures. But, once that pasture runs out of green grass, what do they need? They need a shepherd. And so there's the chief shepherd. And Jesus, of course, is the chief shepherd. He's the one that we listen to. He's the one that protects us. He's the one that's going to care for us. If you imagine what a shepherd does, we'll talk a little bit more about what a shepherd does later. But so yeah, you have the sheep and you have the chief shepherd, and then you have some normal shepherds, or just not chief shepherds, some shepherds that are helping the chief shepherd. And today that is what we're going to be talking about as well. And those are the elders in the church. And so you can have this picture of this family of sheep going through the wilderness. Sometimes they're going to be going through some treacherous paths maybe. Next week we'll be talking about the lion who's going to be looking to devour some of the sheep. But ultimately, when we put our trust in Jesus, he's going to be protecting us from all the dangers that a sheep might be able to get itself into, which is a lot. So today we are going to be talking about elders. We're going to be continuing in 1 Peter. It's going to be 1 Peter 5, verses 1 to 4 we're starting with, but we'll bring those up in a little bit. To start off, I'd like to give a little bit of a definition of what an elder is, just so that we all sort of have an idea of what an elder is in the church. And then I'll mention who the elders are in our church. You won't be able to see them right now, but I'll just mention them by name, and so you can know who the elders actually are in our church, because you may not have met them or known who they are. And so in the church, an elder is a person who is valued for wisdom and holds a position of responsibility and authority and oversight over the people in the church. And so they're somebody who God has given this calling and this responsibility to, look after God's people, look after the flock. And that's why we're going to be using the example of a shepherd later on. And so the elders in our church I'll just name them out. And so Norm is an elder in our church, and he could be watching right now. He's unfortunately not able to be with us in person in Canada right now, but him and Claudia are in the States, and so we will be continuing to pray for them and what God is doing with them in the States. And then we also have Einar, who sometimes you guys have seen for announcements. We have Jason, who you guys see often on Sunday mornings for worship, and we have Gord, who many of you may have met, and Isaac, of course, who is away right now in the States with his family, and also Phil, who was preaching last week. He's not actively an elder right now, but he is an elder and has been with us a lot. And so, let's be praying for all of our elders this week and their families. Just whenever you're reminded of it this week, pray for them. Those are the elders in our church. I'm going to give now just a little bit of a breakdown of where we're going to be going in Peter's instructions for us today. The first part is going to be addressing the elders in particular. And so he's directly talking to the elders. And so that's going to be where the main advice and call is going to be for the elders. But a lot of the principles that we're going to learn are also going to apply to those of us who aren't elders, because ultimately the elders are setting an example to us. And so we're going to be, listening for things that we can apply as well. The second part is going to be what the call and instruction is for all of us who aren't elders. What are we supposed to be doing in response to the elders, and how does that work? And then the third part is going to be something that is instruction for all of us together. It's going to be a call for all of us to do, and we will get to what that is in a moment. But let's start with the first section of our scripture today. So, again, shepherds. So we're thinking shepherds. Elders are kind of like shepherds, and what might a shepherd do? If you think about, you have a shepherd who is there. They're watching over the sheep. They're looking at all the sheep to make sure that, let's say, one of them doesn't just beeline it for the mountains and leave the flock. The shepherd's got to have good view of the entire flock. And so you're watching out to see if one goes astray, and then you're gently leading them back to the flock. Or if one of them gets in danger or injures itself, maybe gets caught in some thorns, or maybe it walks into the water when it shouldn't go into the water and it's drowning, they can use their shepherd staff to help them back in and protect them and help heal them. So they're protecting, they're looking out for the church, they're praying for the church, they're helping be a defense against evil in the church. And so these are sort of all things that when you think of a shepherd, this is sort of what a shepherd is doing. And so let's read sort of some of the specifics that Peter is calling elders to in the passage today. So I exhort the elders among you. I strongly encourage the elders among you, as a fellow elder and a witness of the suffering of Christ, as well as a partaker in the glory that is going to be revealed. So Peter starts off by recognizing and saying that he also is a fellow elder, and he reminds the elders that they are a witness of the sufferings of Christ, and as well as a partaker in the glory that is going to be revealed. And so that's a really encouraging reminder to the elders that they are partakers, and we also are partakers in the glory that is going to be revealed, all that God has promised and is going to bring into our lives in the future. And so then he gives some more instructions. So he says, shepherd the flock of God that is among you, exercising oversight, not under compulsion, but willingly, as God would have you, not for shameful gain, but eagerly. So I'm going to start again just by breaking down the first part. So shepherd the flock that is among you. So this is just a call to, take on that role and responsibility of shepherding the church or the people around you that God has entrusted you with. And so be shepherding them. And you're exercising oversight. So you're looking out for the flock. You're looking out for the believers who are here, and you're making sure things go smoothly, and you're making sure to step in when you need to, or give advice to somebody when they're lacking guidance or something like that. So shepherding, but then he gives this call to not do it under compulsion, but instead, willingly be a shepherd, willingly be a leader, as God would have you. And now I want to talk a little bit about this, because this is something that, not as an elder, but as a leader in my own life, this is something that I have struggled with, doing things under compulsion. There have been, not every time in my life, but there have been a lot of times in my life where I have done things out of compulsion. Not necessarily always like being a bad thing, but sometimes I would go a certain direction in my life because I felt like I had to. I felt like maybe that is where God was calling me to go, or I felt really strongly in myself that was the right thing to do, and so I went. Or maybe it was because the people around me and the voices around me were, really directing me in a certain direction. And so often, at the end of the day, I did choose to go in those directions that God had called me. But the problem is sometimes, my heart and my willingness wasn't there with it. And so even though I was choosing to still be obedient, I was sort of going kicking and screaming, or just, going with reservation in myself, instead of taking the time and praying and searching to have the same desire as God. And here's the thing. This was really encouraging to me, and I've been learning this the last couple of weeks. It says here, not under compulsion, but willingly, as God would have you. You see, it's actually God's desire for us not to serve him or lead or do what he's called us to do under compulsion. He actually wants us to be there with him willingly. And if you think about this in terms of, just a relationship, when you're doing something with your friend, or you have a relationship with somebody, you don't want it to be out of compulsion, like, oh, I have to be here with this person. It's something that God wants us to do because we desire a relationship with him, and we desire to bring other people into that relationship. So not only would it be ineffective to lead under compulsion, but it's also because God cares about, your heart as well. As a leader and as an elder, God really is concerned and cares a lot about his relationship with you. And I know for me, I can often get caught up focusing on all the stuff that I have to do, and I sometimes forget that God still really cares about his relationship with me as well. And so I guess a couple things to remember to help us to not do this is to remember Jesus. Remember, the relationship that we have with him, the core of why we would even be a shepherd or a leader in the first place, or an elder. So be reminded of God's love for you. Reconnect with him. Seek him out and trust in him. And yeah, I would just encourage you as well. God is with you. He's been with you all this time. He cares deeply for you, and He will help you in the things that He's called you to. And I just will be praying that all of us would be able to have that desire to be with Him more. So then also he says here, not for shameful gain, but eagerly. So not just for selfish reasons. Not being an elder so that you can get something out of it, but eagerly, as you're serving the Lord, you're serving Him, and you're helping Him on His mission, helping other people to come into a better relationship with Him. Okay, so we'll move on to verse number 3 now. Verse number 3 says this: not domineering over those in your charge, but being examples to the flock. So we're gonna think back on our flock, sheep, shepherd imagery here, and I want you to imagine a bunch of sheep, grazing out in the field. It's it's eating time. It's going pretty good. The sheep are kind of all meandering around doing their thing, and now I want you to imagine a bunch of shepherds with their staffs running around and yelling at all the sheep. Now, in this situation, if you think about actual sheep, this would be really bad because sheep are quite sensitive to their leader in such a way that if the shepherd is running around in a frenzy, yelling at the sheep or in a panic, maybe the lion shows up and the shepherd runs away in fear, what's going to happen with all the sheep? All the sheep are going to run away in fear as well. And if the shepherd is running around in a frenzy, all of the sheep are going to just go into utter chaos, because the sheep really are looking to the shepherd to learn how to compose themselves, learn how to be. And so if you have a shepherd who is calm and in the case of the church, trusting in God, when the circumstances get really hard or a crisis comes along, trusting in God that He's going to be in control over the situation, then all of the sheep, they're going to follow that. They're going to see the example. If the shepherd decides, okay, we need to move over here, and so there the shepherd goes, and all of the sheep follow just by the example of the shepherd. And so that's what he says here: not domineering over those in your charge, but being examples to the flock in your character and in your relationship with God. And so don't be an angry shepherd. Okay, and so verse 4 says, and when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the unfading crown of glory. So here Peter is reminding the elders and all of us that that God is going to reward us at the end with this unfading crown of glory when Jesus appears, because He is coming back. He is going to appear. You will receive the unfading crown of glory. And so we don't have to strive for success or things necessarily here in this life, but we can trust that God is going to reward us, and ultimately the reward is going to be living with Him in His kingdom. But so we're going to also turn now just to have an example, because as elders and leaders and as all believers, ultimately the one that we are following is Jesus. And so we're going to turn to Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. And we're going to read just a verse about looking to Jesus as our example. So let's read. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so easily, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. So here we have Jesus as our example, and just that picture of him, enduring the cross, enduring the shame of the cross, and the pain of the cross for the joy that was set before him. And that joy, really, part of that joy is that we would all be saved and get to be with him. And so, we all want to look to Jesus and run that race as well, looking to Jesus as our example, as the chief shepherd, and trusting in him, and remembering the joy that he has set before us during times where it gets difficult. So, just a couple of concluding points for elders. Elders run with endurance, run the race with endurance. And then serve with patience and joy. So that's linked to the willingness. Serve with patience with the flock, and joy. And then trust in Jesus and look to him for all of your needs. He cares deeply for you and will continue to provide for you. And so, thank you to all of our elders. You're doing a good job. I hope you will be encouraged today. Now we're going to move on to the younger. And the younger being all of us who are not elders. That's sort of who this next part is addressing. All of us who are not elders. And so the call is this: likewise, verse 5, likewise, you who are younger, be subject to the elders. And so what does that mean? What's he calling us to here? Be subject to the elders. We sort of talked about these different relationships earlier in one of our series, but in this context, let's think of it first as a flock again. So what does a good sheep do? And you might be thinking at this point, like, Tyler, I don't really like being called a sheep. That's not really, like, sometimes that's a negative thing to be called a sheep. In this context, I'm okay to accept that I'm a sheep, because when I look at my life, I realize that there's a lot of times where I really have no clue which way I'm going. And in this world, there's so much chaos going on. And so, ultimately, Jesus is the one who refers to us as sheep, and he's saying you need a shepherd. And ultimately, we are sheep. And so what does a good sheep do? They listen to the voice of the shepherd. They're not running off away from the flock. They're not running into thorn bushes. They're not, running into the water or anything crazy like that. I won't get into it, but if you do know a lot about sheep, they are very precarious animal. They get themselves into a lot of trouble. But so a good sheep or a good someone who's being subject to an elder, you can think about it also like this: a good student. So you're looking towards your elders to learn more about God's word. You're looking towards them to see the example that they're setting to follow. You're looking towards them to ask good questions. If you're having a hard time with something, you're struggling with something, you're turning towards them, you're asking them for help. And then also being a good worker. So, in times where we're serving together at church, we're respecting and honoring our elders. And when they ask us to do something, or maybe it's in the ministry groups as well, this would apply to leaders. When they ask you to do something, you're going to listen to them. Not in every circumstance, but pretty much if they're if they are calling us to what God is calling us to, we're supposed to obey. And so being a good worker. And then also I had here as a good friend. So this is just actually getting to know the elders and being in relationship with them. It's really important. It's important for all of our relationships here at church. But so get to know your elders. Learn from them, watch them, pray for them. Ask good questions, all these things. Lots of good examples. So be subject to the elders. Now, this is going to be the changing point from talking about elders and then all of us who are younger and not elders, and now all of us. This next part is for all of us, every single one. And so this is what he says. He says, "Clothe yourselves all of you, with humility toward one another. For God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. So before we dig into this, I'm gonna draw out the picture that Peter uses to describe how we need to treat humility, and it's clothing. So clothing. I guess I won't be able to hear your answers, but you can answer. What is the purpose of clothing? A couple answers we got from this morning. It protects you from the weather. It covers up your nakedness. That's one of the primary purposes of clothing. And what do you normally have to do with clothing when you get up in the morning? The answer is you have to put it on. When you wake up in the morning, your clothing does not just magically, appear on your body. You're ready to go. You actually you got to wake up. You got to get your clothes. You got to put them on. It takes a choice, and it takes some effort to put on clothing. And what about this? Do you just have to put on clothing one time? Like, did you just put clothing on once when you were a young child and you never had to put clothing on again? No, you have to put clothing on every single day. Every single day, you got to wake up and you got to put your clothes on. That's the way that clothing works. And so it's not gonna happen automatically. And so this is the picture that Peter uses to describe what our attitude should be towards humility and what we need to do with humility. And the reason I think he uses this is because humility does not come naturally to us. Because we're sinful, broken humans, our natural inclination is pride. Our natural state is pride. We are thinking about ourselves. We are thinking about what's going to be good for me. We are thinking about, how I can be better or have a better life or be happier or whatever it is. There's a whole bunch of subtle ways that pride influences everything that we do. And so Peter is saying we have to choose to put on humility. And he's saying this is to all of us. Nobody is going to just naturally be just humbled the way, from birth. They're not just going to be humbled. We have to choose to do this. It's something we have to put on each and every day, in every situation, And he's saying to clothe ourselves in humility toward one another. So when you're in a situation with your coworker or your friend or your spouse or your children or your parents, we're to clothe ourselves in humility, which means in that situation where maybe you feel the natural inclination to be proud, you're going to say, no, I'm going to clothe myself in humility. I'm going to listen to them. I'm going to, allow space for them to say what they need to say, or I'm going to hear them out, or I'm going to serve them in this moment, even though maybe they're frustrating me. There's countless situations where we need to do this, but Peter is calling us to be constantly clothing ourselves in humility, because if we don't, we're going to be really proud. And when we get really proud, we're probably not going to be able to see it. So we have to constantly be reminding ourselves to put on our humility clothes and not looking out for everybody else to make sure they're putting on their humble clothes, but clothing ourselves in humility in all situations. Okay, so yes, this is our picture of clothing, and clothing, our call to clothe ourselves in humility. And he says this is why. Why do we need to clothe ourselves in humility? He says, for God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. So God's response to us is actually different, depending on the stance and the attitude of our heart and our mind. His response to us is going to be different. If we are being proud in our relationships with other people and we are coming to God in pride, he's going to oppose us. It doesn't mean that he doesn't love us. It doesn't mean he doesn't want to have a relationship with us. But in that moment, he's going to oppose our pride. And we're going to learn more about how Jesus did this with Peter in his life. But when we are humble, when we humble ourselves towards God, he shows us mercy. And so it's very, very important to remember. And now we're going to take some time to just remember who it is who is writing all of this to us. So remember, this is Peter. So Peter, if you don't know about Peter, he was one of Jesus' disciples, one of his 12 disciples. And Peter was sort of the go-getter, like he was the hoorah guy in Jesus's 12 disciples. He was ready to rumble. Like this guy, when he got in, he was ready to just go and get it all done. And he also really wanted to fight Rome. He was very convinced that possibly Jesus was coming and the Messiah was going to help them fight Rome. And so there's this situation where Peter cuts off the ear of a Roman soldier. And Jesus is like, no, Jesus, this is when the Roman soldier was coming to arrest Jesus, but he's like, Jesus heals the Roman soldier's ear to show Peter that this is not my way. And so you have that situation. So I'm going to give a couple examples and stories from Peter's life now that are going to just show the transformation that Jesus has had in Peter's life. And so here's one of them. So remember, Peter, he wants to fight Rome. He cuts off a Roman soldier's ear, and he's the one who writes these words. And this is just a section from earlier in 1 Peter chapter 2. There's a really good sermon that Isaac did on this earlier that we can link below. But this is what he says: "Be subject for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether it be to the emperor as supreme or to the governors as sent by him to punish those who do evil and to praise those who do good. For this is the will of God, that by doing good you should put to silence the ignorance of foolish people. Live as people who are free, not using your freedom as a cover-up for evil, but living as servants of God. Honor everyone, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the emperor." So he's talking about being subject to, the different authorities that God has placed in our life. And we had all kinds of examples of this. Today, the example that we're learning about and following is to be subject to the elders in our church. And so remember, this is Peter who's writing this, the one who kind of wanted to rebel a little bit. And he writes these words. He says, honor the emperor. You can just see the amount that Jesus has changed Peter over his lifetime. He wanted to fight Rome, and now he's writing to all of God's people, under the guidance of God and the Holy Spirit. But he's writing these words, honor the emperor. And you can just see the amount that God has changed his heart and the mercy that God has shown to him. And so, look, he's also the one who calls us to clothe ourselves in humility. And so we're going to look at one more section of Peter's life from the Gospels. But before we get there, I just want to say, if you have been convicted today or on any day of pride that you may have in your life, don't be afraid. Don't run away from God in that moment when you realize that you have pride, but acknowledge it and turn to Jesus. Turn to him at any moment in our life, at any moment in our day, at any time. We can turn to him and humble ourselves before him. You see, God's response to us when we do that is always going to be to receive us. It's always going to be to give us mercy. And so, when we realize that we are proud, we can always turn to him, and you can know that Jesus is going to show you love. He's going to show you mercy. He's going to help you change. And we can see this just by how he's changed Peter's life. Peter was very proud, and God has done this miracle in his life to teach him humility. And so when we turn to God, he can do the same thing in our lives. It's the same God who lives with us today who can do these things in our lives. So be encouraged by that. So Peter has received a lot of mercy from God, but there also have been times where Peter was proud and Jesus opposed him. So we're going to read about one of those right now to conclude. And so this is what's going on here. This is from the Gospel of Matthew, and Jesus is very close to being crucified, and he's going to die. And he's with his disciples, and he's telling them the plan. Because Jesus knows that he's been called here to die on the cross in order that we might be saved, that we can have a relationship with him again. He's going to pay the price for all of this sin and all of our pride that we've done. But so Jesus tells them, and then Peter does something astonishing. So this is what it says. From the time Jesus began to show his disciples, from that time Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and on the third day be raised. So Jesus tells them this. And Peter, who knows Jesus, remember, Peter has seen Jesus do incredible things. He's seen Jesus, stop waves with his voice. He's seen Jesus feed thousands and thousands of people from nothing. He's seen Jesus heal, sick people, heal blind people. He's seen all of these incredible things. He knows who Jesus is. And this is what Peter's response to Jesus is in this moment. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Peter here, this is astonishing. Peter here has so much pride that he is rebuking Jesus. And, this is convicting because it makes me think and wonder. I know there's probably times in my life that I've done this too. But Peter takes Jesus aside and began to rebuke him, saying, "Far be it from you, Lord, this shall never happen to you." Part of Peter's desire was that he didn't want Jesus to die. He didn't want Jesus to go through this, but Jesus understands that there's something deeper going on here. And so Jesus responds to him in a very bold way. He opposes him here. He says, but Jesus turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me. For you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man." This is Jesus, the God of the universe, telling Peter, this has got to be the one of the most oppositional moments in Peter's life. Peter's his disciple and his dear friend. And this is not a kind thing in this moment for Peter to hear. He says to him, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man." So you have this moment in Peter's life where he is full of pride in speaking to Jesus, and Jesus opposes him. But he doesn't do it out of hate towards Peter. He actually does it out of love. And what is going to happen here is he's going to now give us an example to all of us of the way that we should live. And he's going to teach us the way really to be humble as well. And so it's a good reminder to us as well to not focus on the things of man, but to focus on the things of God. Okay, so I'm going to read this a couple times to conclude. And we'll just think on these words for the rest of this day and our time of worship together. Then Jesus told his disciples, "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake will find it." Let's read it once more. Then Jesus told his disciples, "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake will find it." So this is the picture that he gives us of humility. We're denying ourselves. We're taking up our cross and we're following Jesus. We're not going to try and save our lives, but we're laying down our lives following Jesus' example about how he laid down his life for us. And when we come into that relationship with him, he gives us the strength and the grace to really be able to do this, to lay down our lives, and ultimately then we're going to find it in him. So I'm going to pray now, and I believe the worship team will be up here in just a moment. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for today and